Hi, everybody. Welcome to the latest episode of the People of Penn State podcast. I'm Ryan Jones, the interim executive officer of the Penn State Alumni Association. Very excited to have everybody join us today for our latest episode, getting to spend some time with a proud Penn State alum who's doing some really, really cool things across the border in Ohio. In fact, Joe Apgar from Pelotonia. Joe, welcome to the podcast. Thanks for taking some time out of what I know is a busy schedule for you to join us.
Yeah, thanks for having me. I'm excited to do this.
I appreciate it. So as I mentioned, you're across the border, our shared border with the Buckeye State there, and in fact are in the heart of it in Columbus. We'll get into that a bit. But really excited to talk about the work that you're doing there. It's centered in Columbus, I guess, right? But with really a broad impact. You are the CEO of Pelotonia. I'm pronouncing it correctly, I hope.
Yeah, Pelotonia. It's
Okay.
we accept both.
You're good. Which is a nonprofit founded in 2008 to fund life-saving cancer research. Joe, you're a cancer survivor. You were diagnosed with testicular cancer during your senior year at Penn State. Is that correct?
Yep. Yeah, that's correct.
So glad you're still around, man.
Yeah, thank you.
You began writing and fundraising for Pelotonia after your recovery. Graduated from Penn State in 2008 with a finance degree. And then you went on to work in private equity and supported capital fundraising in firm-wide strategic initiatives for Rockbridge Capital. And you also co-founded a cancer-focused leadership event, RTRX. You've been recognized by all kinds of folks, Columbus Business First, Columbus CEO, and Harvard's Young American Leaders Program. I think most importantly, most significantly for our conversation, you're a vocal advocate for cancer research, adoption, and young adult cancer survivorship. And you live in Columbus, as mentioned, with your wife, Jill, and your daughter, Cora. Got everything correct there, I hope?
That's perfect. That's a great intro.
I want to talk a lot, obviously, about the work you're doing now. But if we can kind of tell your Penn State story to start out. If you can talk a little bit about where you're from and how you ended up at Penn State in the first place.
Yeah, so excited to be on here. I grew up in a small town called Edinburgh, Pennsylvania, which is about 3.5, 4 hours away from State College, up near Erie. So the northwest corner of the state. And my mom was the only person in the family who had gone to college. She's a Penn Stater back in the day. And so sort of just grew up in a house where, a lot of kids in Pennsylvania grow up dreaming of going to Penn State and, football Saturdays and watching Joe Pa and the team on, TV every weekend. And that was sort of the household I grew up in. I only applied to one school. I always wanted to go to Penn State. I just thought the world of the university, and so I was excited to be able to go there. I actually went to a branch campus for 2 years. So I went to Barron up in Erie, branch campus there for 2 years, and then finished my 2 years down at University Park, which for me was sort of the size that fit, and it was a really good experience for me. Coming from a small town, going to Barron and learning how to learn, to be quite honest, and sort of getting my academics in really good order, and then finishing up at University Park was an awesome experience for me.
Can you talk a little bit more about your time at Barron? It was fairly close to home for you, right? I spent my freshman year at Penn State Altoona, so certainly have an appreciation for that Commonwealth campus experience. What did starting out at a little bit closer to home, a little bit smaller campus like Barron, which has got a great reputation in so many areas, what did that kind of, I guess, how did that benefit you, do you think?
Yeah, I think in a lot of ways, I did pretty well in high school, grade wise, and I was really intimidated to leave home and go to, the big university that had the big classes, and so Barron was sort of the perfect middle ground. Those classes were smaller. I lived on campus, so I didn't live at home. So I still went away from home, and ended up meeting a handful of group of guys that became, really good friends, best friends, best man at my wedding, someone I met at Barron. And then I had a couple really close high school buddies who also went to Barron, and we all sort of transitioned to University Park after 2 years. And it was a great experience. I don't miss the snow. It snows a lot at Barron, but I think for me, having the smaller classes, the environment at Barron is, it's great. You've still got all the amenities of a big campus, but it was what I needed in my, I think, situation. And I was glad my parents really pushed me in that direction to explore that, and it turned out to be the best thing for me.
And things are going well. You've got your major and you have a sense of where you're headed. And then you get a diagnosis. To the extent that you want to talk about that, I'm guessing you're pretty open about it.
Yeah.
Can you run us through what happened there when you obviously got that life-changing news?
Yeah. So I was at University Park. We lived in an apartment. I haven't been back to campus in a while, but an apartment building called Beaver Hill, which is right downtown. And one of my roommates, I had two roommates my senior year. One of them was a nursing student, and he was actually the person who ended up being the best man in our wedding. He and I were sitting on the couch on a Friday morning, and I said, Tom, I've got this lump, and explained it to him. And we were actually sitting there playing Mario Golf on Nintendo 64, of all things, and just having a quiet Friday morning. And he turned the game off. He said, "Get up, we're going to," I think it was called Rittenhour, which is sort of the health building for students there on campus. And he walked me there. He waited outside. I went in and ended up talking to the doctor and getting examined. And, to make a long story short, within an hour, I was over at Mount Nittany Medical Center getting an ultrasound and scans and all sorts of stuff. And so my world got flipped upside down pretty quick that afternoon. But I don't know if I ever would have gone, or I probably would have gone at a later date, maybe when things got worse. But had it not been for my roommate pushing that and advocating, you got to go get checked out, who knows what would have happened. But it was the very first week back of school in the spring semester of 2008. So that was my final semester of college, which added a whole other wrinkle to it, because I was on track to graduate that spring and needed a couple credits that I had pushed off to the spring there. Two of them were my physical education credits, which I could no longer do. And so it made for a tough sort of final semester. I was in and out of the hospital quite a bit, but ended up graduating that spring, which was an amazing milestone to do with all my friends and family, and ended up moving to Columbus right after that.
That's incredible. The fact that you didn't have to take the semester off or something and you powered through that is pretty remarkable. Obviously, that helped inform what you've been doing since. Did you know at the time that was going to change maybe your course, or did that kind of come a little bit later, I guess? And maybe this is sort of the time to talk about how you started your career and kind of how you've transitioned.
Yeah. So I had no idea it would change sort of my career path at all. When I got diagnosed, I had already had a job offer that I had signed to move to Columbus and work at a private equity firm called Rockbridge. And I had signed that in the fall of 2007. So Columbus, in a weird way, sort of became, this thing where I felt like if I could get to Columbus, that meant I was healthy enough. I, didn't have any, nothing stopped me from getting there. And so Columbus became this little beacon of hope, as ironic as it sounds. I had visited Columbus once during the recruiting process and to get an apartment and all that stuff. And so I'd signed a lease, and all I wanted to do when I got sick was move to Columbus, despite the Buckeyes being here and all that brings with it. And still to this day, I have to deal with it. And so I ended up joining this firm, Rockbridge, in June of 2008. And I loved it. I studied finance. I worked in capital raising, capital formation, which is, a big part of private equity world, is going out and raising money from institutional investors. And then I led strategic projects for the firm, and we grew from 20 people to over 100 by the time I left firm-wide. So I got to be a part of a lot of growth, a lot of really exciting stuff. I also got to be an analyst at an investment firm during the global financial crisis, which was crazy and hard, and probably the best experience you could ever get, working through a lot of that. Rockbridge is primarily a real estate investor and one of the top 10 hotel owners in the United States. And so the hotel business was hit really hard with the financial crisis. Real estate obviously was hit really hard. It was a great learning experience. And, while all of that was happening, I had transitioned my care here to Ohio State's cancer hospital, which is known as the James Cancer Hospital here. And it is one of the top 10 cancer hospitals in the country. It's an amazing, amazing institution. And so my care continued here, and I continued to be seen pretty regularly for a few years. And what happened in 2009 was this ride called Pelotonia, a bike ride, started. And it was a fundraiser for cancer research. And, not dissimilar from, Thon, which is a big grassroots, obviously the big fundraiser for Four Diamonds Fund at Penn State that's student run. This was not student run, but it was a similar concept. So peer-to-peer fundraising, community-based fundraising. And in 2011, I signed up to ride 100 miles. I didn't own a bike. I borrowed a bike. I had not been on a bike probably since I was 16 years old. But I was healthy enough, and I wanted to do something big that proved, I was 24 at the time. So I wanted to prove to myself that I was healthy, that I wasn't this sick kid that I had been for a couple of years. And I trained with a few people, and I rode 100 miles and fundraised as part of it. So I think I raised $2,000. We formed a team, and I rode 100 miles, and it was life-changing in a lot of ways because I found this community of people that had a similar experience to me. Met a lot of other young cancer survivors, met a lot of great doctors and just leaders in our community. It was a great way to meet people. And my affinity for the organization grew and grew and grew. And so I continued to ride. I ended up being the team captain of our corporate team at Rockbridge. And we ended up getting, 25, then 50, then 100 people signed up to ride. We invited our business partners in for the weekend, which is every August. We ended up starting RTRX, which is now a 1,000-person leadership conference that it's built around Pelotonia Ride Weekend every August and raises money for the event. And so, I loved my, 8 years that I spent in private equity. I learned a ton. I worked with a lot of great people. But in 2016, I had this opportunity to transition my career, and the founding CEO of Pelotonia had moved on. The board of directors had hired the second CEO of Pelotonia, a gentleman named Doug Ullman, who had grown and ran the Livestrong organization, made famous by the yellow wristbands and Lance Armstrong, obviously. And he had run that organization for 15 years and had actually moved to Columbus to run and grow Pelotonia. And, I've always thought you work for people, and I had an opportunity to be his right-hand person in what I thought would be a 2-year, kind of career pivot and adventure before I went back into finance. And that was about 10 years ago. So safe to say it's worked out differently than I thought. I never imagined myself in the CEO seat myself, but it's an opportunity to wake up every day and do really good work, really meaningful work. We've raised over $320 million for cancer research here at the James that's impacting people all over the world. We've helped fund the discovery of new drugs, new treatments, new prevention protocols, new genetic tests that are saving people's lives. And so it's really fun to be a part of. If you would have told 21-year-old Joe that that's what you'd be doing when you were 39, I would have never thought that was true. But it was a wild ride so far.
Very, very cool. And I've had a chance to talk to some colleagues at Ohio State about it, some peers over there, and have heard great things about the organization. And they bring up the Thon comparison. I think there's an awareness, obviously, that, Thon, given how long it's been around and the prominence of it, you obviously have a sense of it. You were on campus here. So I wanted to clarify a couple things. So that first ride you did, was that like a stationary ride, or were you out on the road for that?
No, it's a 100-mile bike ride out on the
Oh,
road. Yeah. We've Ohio is full of country roads.
yeah,
Yeah, there's 100 miles down to Athens, Ohio, which is actually where Ohio University is.
of course. Yeah.
So that was the first ride I did.
Very cool. But now, so is there an annual event the same way that there is of Thon itself on campus in kind of a similar fashion?
Yeah, so it's not necessarily on campus. We have a couple big annual events. So our big one is called Ride Weekend. It happens the first weekend every August. So it just happened a few weeks ago. We had 7,500 bike riders. We had 3,000 volunteers. We had about 50,000 spectators. It is a huge production. The band OAR, kicked off opening ceremonies and played a private concert, and then people ride throughout the weekend anywhere from 20 to 100 miles in a given day over courses that we have laid out and have police support and rest stops and all those things. So that's sort of our centerpiece event. We've got a couple of other events throughout the year. We have a kids ride series where we've got about a dozen bike rides that we organize for little kids to get involved. And then we have a gravel ride / hike where we do it in the fall. It's in the woods and it's gravel cycling, which has become really popular in Ohio. It's actually really popular in central Pennsylvania as well, as gravel cycling's become increasingly popular. And so similar to Thon, we've got sort of this hallmark weekend that everything centers around, but we also fundraise year round for that as a result. So it's you work all year really for this one weekend, which fortunately we had really good weather this year.
Yeah, that helps out, huh? Is that something again? I mean, it's technically competing for dollars, but at the end of the day, everybody's trying to do the same thing and have a huge positive impact in the fight against cancer. Is that something where you have, I guess, maybe not collaboration, but conversations with folks at Four Diamonds and Thon about more effective approaches and maximizing the work that you all do?
Yeah. So, I mean, the short answer is yes. So there's about 50 similar bike rides in the country that raise money for cancer research. We are the second largest in North America. There's one that's larger up in Boston called the Pan Mass Challenge. All the bike cycling community is a really tight knit community, and so we actually all get together at a big conference that happens every winter and share best practices and all those things. That conference is also what's called the peer-to-peer fundraising conference, and Thon has a really big presence there. So a handful of years ago, I had the opportunity to speak on the keynote stage of that conference, and it came up that I was a Penn State graduate, and sort of I had the opportunity sort of organically to actually talk about Thon and my admiration for Thon. And I actually didn't realize that the team was in the room. So I got to spend some time with their team, and there's real power in community philanthropy, right? So you think about Thon, I forget what the number was this year, but north of 15 or $16 million that they raised. You could go find one person that would donate $15 million. It would take a lot of work. It would take a lot of relationship building. That feels very different than when you have 100,000 people donate and all of these students participating, and you have the entire community rallying around this cause. Because not only does a cause like cancer need money, it needs awareness and advocacy, and that is what the community can really bring to a movement like this. And so Pelotonia is built around that same thing, which is, we'll raise close to $30 million this year, and we'll have 200,000 people from around the world that donate. We've had 7,500 riders, 3,000 volunteers, and the flywheel of all of those people talking about cancer research, understanding and educating themselves and their own networks on the breakthroughs that are happening is really, really important to actually moving the needle forward on research and enrolling people in clinical trials and, making sure people are getting their screenings, things like that. And I think that's the secondary role that a lot of these grassroots organizations have the opportunity to play, is with real advocacy and awareness. And I've always been, a big admirer of Thon. I think, I have an even greater appreciation for it now, sitting in this role that I sit in, where, getting students to do something is really hard, and getting a lot of students aligned around something and fundraising and doing something really in sync like that is a really big challenge. And the fact that it's student led and student run, it's so well organized, it has such a tremendous impact. Thon has undoubtedly saved thousands of people's lives, and it's people that you won't ever get to meet. They obviously have some of the kids that participate, but there are thousands of people that have directly benefited from money raised by Thon, by Penn State, and it's really magical. And it's something to be really, really proud of. And it's the same thing we have here with Pelotonia. I think the other important piece is no single institution is going to solve the problem of cancer. Cancer is hundreds of different types of diseases, sort of all classified as cancer. And, it's very much a building block, style enterprise where, the work that happens, at Penn State can be built upon by researchers at Ohio State and vice versa. And so you have these networks of these great institutions all over the country. The Big Ten has a Big Ten Cancer Consortium, and they're all building off one another. And so every institution needs its pipeline of fundraising, of advocates that are lifting it up. And that is how the ball really gets moved forward. There's not going to be one single person in a single lab that has this big breakthrough. It's, it's sort of like Legos, and you're building this really big Lego set, and everybody's contributing, a handful of blocks to it. And at the end of the day, hopefully the result is a dramatically different world. But it's the result of all of these parties and enterprises coming together.
Absolutely. It's really well put. And it's, again, you know this, especially, your affiliation now with Penn State, and also, again, being in the heart of Columbus there. But that sense, and when people think about, colleges like this, Big Ten schools in particular, you think about the competitiveness on the field, but that collaboration behind the scenes in the academic world on the research side probably doesn't get enough attention, probably isn't talked enough about. And that's life-changing, life-improving breakthroughs and work being done all across the country. And again, that collaboration, as you mentioned, is such an essential part of that. It's always been a part of, I think, why Penn State joined the Big Ten in the first place all those years ago was obviously, there's football and athletics, it's a big deal, but the chance to have high-level peers on the research side in particular is essential and so important, valuable. And by the way, I had to glance. It was 17.7 million for Thon 2020.
Yeah, it's incredible.
Record, so I had obligatory, of course. But yeah, incredible work being done by your organization and Thon, of course, and so many others. It's pretty inspiring stuff. How much for you at this point, Joe? Again, it's been not quite 20 years now, but it's been a long time since you got this diagnosis and got through that difficult period of your own cancer your own cancer bout. How much though is that still in the back of your mind day to day with the work that you do? Do you not need that kind of motivation anymore because you're kind of surrounded by the impact, or is it still sort of in the back of your mind somewhere?
Yeah, I think, it's a couple things. I get asked this question a lot. So one of the surgeries I have a scar that goes from basically my heart all the way through my pelvis. So every day, I get out of bed and I go to brush my teeth, I see it. And so I have a constant physical reminder of, having had cancer. And then for a long time, it was really motivating for me, fundraising, learning how to ride a bike, road cycle, so I could participate in this event. And then I began speaking about my own experience and, been on a lot of different podcasts and have, spoken in front of a lot of different crowds and have always been really open in sharing my story. What I realized early on was, cancer's a tough diagnosis for anybody. Cancer is a particularly tough diagnosis for someone that's young. And, there's a lot of intricacies and nuances that come with being a young adult that that has had cancer. And so things like family planning, fertility, dating, finances earlier in your career, it's expensive to have cancer. And so all of those things. So I learned really quickly that sharing your story can be really inspiring and helpful to other people. So I've met so many people as a result of sharing my story. Now that I'm almost 20 years, beyond it, most people locally know me, as the CEO of Pelotonia. They know my story that I've had cancer. And I am constantly surrounded by, helping people navigate getting into the James or getting second opinions. I probably talk to 2 or 3 people a week that are newly diagnosed. An hour before we started on this podcast, I was talking to somebody who just checked into the ER, a complication of their own cancer diagnosis. And so I'm sort of constantly talking to people going through a cancer experience. And I'm also constantly with researchers and doctors who are doing the research and doing the work and doing the clinical work with patients. And I'm so inspired by them. And so, the new CEO of the James Cancer Hospital, and one of the big reasons she came here, her name's Dr. Kim Rathmel, and she's the most recent director of the National Cancer Institute, which is a presidential appointment. And so she was a director of the NCI, the National Cancer Institute, for 3 years, and her term was up in January this year. For someone like her, who is at the very top of the game in the world from a research standpoint, to come here because the thing she values the most and the thing she thinks will move the needle the most on progress in research is actually community involvement. And so Pelotonia was one of the big reasons she chose to come here. So I'm now really motivated by, my proximity to seeing a lot of this work being done and the progress that's actually happening. I know so many people who are on drugs and treatments today that didn't exist 5 years ago and that are alive as a result. So that is now my motivation. I think, my personal story, I'm reminded of it constantly, never in a negative way. In a lot of ways, I'm grateful for, the path it's taken my life on. I've always said I wouldn't change it. I don't think I would go back and change it. It's afforded me a lot of opportunities and things, and I'm healthy now. And, it's easy to say that when you're on the other side of it and you're healthy, but I do have a constant daily reminder, but what I'm really inspired by now is the work that's happening and the progress that's being made for families and people is really remarkable.
Yeah, I can imagine to be that up close to the breakthroughs and the potential breakthroughs, right? Not only the things that are happening, things that are coming down the pike. That's got to be really, really encouraging and really inspiring. Is there anything about this work that you think would surprise people? Any aspect of the big picture work that you do and that you're a part of that you think maybe folks wouldn't expect or understand?
Yeah, I think there's a lot of things. On the cancer side, the amount of cancer that gets presented as a result of lack of screenings. And so, there's a number of cancer screenings: breast cancer screening, colon cancer screening, lung cancer screening under certain circumstances, endometrial cancer, uterine cancer screenings. So a lot of screenings that get missed, and as a result, end up presenting cancer a number of years later. So there's a huge amount of cancer in our country that is completely preventable if people are getting screened. And I don't think people know and quite understand the impact that screening can have in a positive way. I think on the general kind of operational side of doing what I do, we have a 20-person team. We have 3,000 volunteers that we manage every year. And, we're very efficient, but we're very lean. And, we do everything. And so, my role as CEO is to be out in the community and in a lot of ways, the figurehead of the organization. But I also really like getting my hands dirty and doing work. And, so I go out and scout routes and scout venues and do a lot of that stuff, which I think people find generally surprising. I don't like the term control freak, but I'm a control enthusiast. So, the work's really fun. I think one of the things people appreciate but don't always recognize is, in philanthropy, in nonprofit work, it's very personal for people. And so our team, everyone's got a story on our team of why, they're so inspired by our mission, but every participant we have has that same reason. And so, when you think about who's showing up on ride weekend for Pelotonia, it's not just 7,500 people that like riding a bike. In fact, in a lot of ways, it's opposite. We don't have a ton of bike riders, serious bike riders. We have our people that have been impacted by cancer. And so everybody's approaching our work in a really personal way. And it's important to remember that. And how can you make that special? How can you make the weekend special? One of the things cancer does to people and it does to families, it makes them feel really hopeless. And so when you are diagnosed with cancer, you kind of feel hopeless. You more than kind of feel hopeless. You do feel pretty hopeless at one point. But if you're actually one step removed and you're the caregiver, if you're the primary caregiver of someone that's going through cancer, it is the most hopeless feeling spot you can be in because you can't control that person's emotions. Nothing's happening to you, and you're feeling the impacts of all of it. And a lot of times you just feel like there's nothing you can do. And what people have realized is that events like Pelotonia, events like Thon, is something you can do. I can ride a bike in honor of my, friend or loved one. I can dance in Thon to celebrate, my mother or father or grandmother. And so that tangibility of an event like this is really, really powerful. And so it's really fun for us to build, and it's fun for us to experience the weekend and just to get to meet so many people who have these amazing stories, or they're sharing amazing stories of someone they've lost in their life, from cancer. And so it's, it can get heavy for a lot of people, but it's really inspiring. It's motivating. You get to sort of see the best of humanity, through this work, which is really cool.
Yeah. I had a chance for the first time. I've been to Thon, a number of times over the years, but I had a first chance this year to be on stage for part of it on behalf of the Alumni Association. And when you see that room packed with everybody in there, there's not a lot of emotional kind of punches in a good way. That impact that just kind of over you to see everybody coming together, celebratory, hopeful in that kind of environment. I still get chills thinking about it. So I can certainly relate to what you're saying there. I can see how that keeps you going every day, probably pretty easily. Huh?
Yeah.
Yeah. Last thing, Joe, certainly not the most important question, but one I'm sure you get, and one I feel like our listeners and viewers will want to know. You've been in Columbus a long time now.
Yeah.
How do you handle being a Columbus guy, but still with that Penn State degree and a Pennsylvania native and all
that? That's a great question. So, some context for listeners. So I'm in my office right now. My office actually overlooks Ohio Stadium. About 30 minutes ago, they just did a practice flyover with a fighter jet for the Texas-Ohio State game. And it flew right by my office window. I also live walking distance to the stadium. So I'm surrounded by it. I have a 6-year-old daughter in preschool. On Monday mornings, they show the band from the football game and, whatever song they did. It's everywhere here. I'm a public enough figure in town and everyone knows I went to Penn State. It is in every bio that's ever written about me. I bring it up probably far too often. It's tough to, be a Penn State fan in Ohio State land because we don't have a great record over the last decade. But I think it's more important to be true to my alma mater than it is to, the place where I sort of live and work. I love college football. I mean, one of the reasons I chose to come to Columbus was just I love being in a university city, a university town surrounded by young people and the energy that any university brings. And I love college football Saturdays. My wife went to school in upstate New York. It did not have a football atmosphere in the fall, and she's obsessed with it. Like, she thinks it's the coolest thing. just the way everyone, shuts down on Saturdays and goes to the game. So I go to probably 5 or 6 games a year over at Ohio Stadium. I have the benefit of, being offered lots of tickets for the Penn State game, so I get my choice of seats. I will wear a white shirt with a Penn State jacket in Ohio Stadium for the Penn State game. I will not be ashamed of it. But it's tough. It's similar to Penn State environment. It's a tough, hostile environment. But I think there's a lot of respect last year, and especially going into this year, for the football team at Penn State. I think there's a lot of people that wanted to see an Ohio State Penn State final last year. Obviously, we came up a little short versus Notre Dame, but there's more Penn Staters than you would think out in Columbus, but just the sheer volume of Ohio State Buckeyes here can be a little suffocating at times, and it'd be nice if we could bring home a win this year. Nothing would make my year more than coming into Ohio Stadium and putting a win on the scoreboard.
Absolutely. We've got plenty of experience. I've made a lot of those trips out there for those games myself. And we'll be back in November. We'll have our Roar Tour tonight and our pep rally Saturday. So hopefully we'll see you there.
Yeah.
You're invited right now. If you haven't gotten a formal invite, please take this as one.
Perfect.
Yeah, it is a great environment. It's a great college football town. Really a city, like you said, a little bit bigger than State College, but a lot of fun. Great environment in that stadium. And you're absolutely right. We've actually got a really, really healthy Penn State alumni community in and around Columbus. Our alumni out there. We've got a great chapter in Columbus that always goes out in force. So it'll be fun. Hopefully we can bring that W back home this year. But certainly a great environment, and you're not too far from State College, so you can get back here from time to time, I hope.
Yeah, that's right.
Good deal. All right, well, Joe, listen, I really appreciate the time. It's been great talking to you and learning a bit more about your story and your work. Like I said, I hope we do see you in November. But in the meantime, please keep up the great work, and thanks again.
Yeah, thanks for having me. This is fun.
Of course. And thanks everybody for tuning in. We'll catch you next time on the People of Penn State podcast. Bye-bye.